Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. We certainly thank you and appreciate your participation in today's meeting. It's a pleasure to see all of you here and see the enthusiasm about the new university. Right, Terry? There you go. uh, to We have an important conversation to have today with Dr. Ken Shine. It's really a pleasure to have Dr. Shine here with us as well. On behalf of President Nelson, thank you for being here. Unfortunately, he cannot be here because we also have other visitors from UT system, including the Chancellor, and he's in meetings in Harlingen to discuss a whole variety of initiatives regarding the new university. And of course, pretty soon here, signing off a check to the new university in the amount of $196 million for as a result of the Board of Regents' approval of permanent university funds for a science building here in the Edinburgh campus, two buildings for the new medical school, and I assume Dr. Shine will address some of those issues, and then some buildings as well at the Brownsville campus as part of the new university. So we're really, really very enthusiastic about this. One of the key issues that people have been asking questions is the new medical school, right? The new medical school for South Texas, which has been in the planning for a very, very long time, and which people were very eager and enthusiastic about it because it not would only come forth with a new university, but it will set the stage to really address the healthcare issues of the Rio Grande Valley, of South Texas. It would allow us to really train the next generations of medical doctors who will remain in South Texas to address a whole variety of issues that we confront in the health side area. But that would also allow us to expand the research infrastructure, allow us to address research issues that are critical in the medical field. And as you know, we are having a national search for the founding dean of the medical school. We are in the process of interviewing, as many of you know, the fourth candidate for the founding dean of the medical school. And then UT system and the Board of Regents will make a determination on who the founding dean will be, who will eventually actively engage with the planning process that we are engaging as we speak with our 43 planning groups, working groups that are taking a look at the academic programs and the operational issues associated with the new university. But today, we really want to talk about the new medical school. We want to see what are the intersections between the new medical school and the new university. We want to talk about what is in the planning for the medical school here in South Texas. And really, quite honestly, there could be no best person to talk about the new medical school in South Texas than our invited speaker today, Dr. Kenneth Shine. Let me briefly introduce Dr. Shine, who's an MD, and his current role is Special Advisor to the Chancellor of the University of Texas System. He is currently overseeing the development of a new medical school in South Texas, as well as another medical school in Austin. As you know, two medical schools are being formed as part in the UT system, one in South Texas, one in Austin. Dr. Ken Shine has the primary responsibility to ensure that this process continues to develop and evolve and that we have a medical school admitting our first cohort of medical students in the fall of 2016. So no easy task, but a wealth of experience and a wealth of history in this area to really make sure that this process continues to evolve. Prior to his role as special advisor, Dr. Shine served as the executive vice chancellor for health affairs at UT System. In that capacity, he was responsible for an operating budget of close to $8.4 billion for 6 UT system health initiatives. He led the system-wide initiatives in clinical effectiveness, patient safety, and public health, as well as efforts to transform medical education. He was the president of the Institute of Medicine from 1992 to 2002. Under Dr. Shine's leadership, the IOM, the Institute of Medicine, played an important and visible role in addressing key issues in medicine and healthcare. IOM reports on the quality of care and patient safety, heightened national awareness of these very important issues. Dr. Shine was also the founding director of the RAND Center for Domestic and International Health Security. He led the center's efforts to make health a central component of U.S. foreign policy and guide the center's evolving research agenda. Dr. Shine is a professor of medicine emeritus at UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles School of Medicine. Before becoming president of the IOM, he was dean and provost, so he sympathizes. He was dean and provost for medical sciences at UCLA. So again, as you can see from his background and experience, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Shine be with us today and take the lead initiative in the formation of the new School of Medicine here at the Rio Grande Valley. Please help me welcome Dr. Shine.
Thank you very, very much, Provost. Yes, I emphasize empathy. I have lots of empathy for provosts for a whole variety of reasons. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you for being here. I feel badly that we don't have more chairs. I'll try to be as succinct as possible, if that is possible. We are very excited about the developments of the new university, as well as the development of the medical school here. You have to go back to the 1870s when the people of Texas were trying to decide where they put the University of Texas. And there was a political controversy about it, such that they ended up saying that the university academic campus would go in one city and that the medical school would go in a second city. They held a plebiscite of the citizens, and the citizens voted to put the University of Texas at Austin and the medical school at Galveston, which at that time was the wealthiest city, large port, public health campus, and so forth. That's why Galveston School is called the University of Texas Medical Branch. But it set a pattern in which the health campuses in the University of Texas, as in most of the rest of the state, were separated from the academic campuses. And so we are engaged in a really important new endeavor in which we're creating two medical schools which are, in fact, part of academic campuses. Having been, as you heard, Dean and Provost at UCLA, I appreciate the enormous advantages of being responsible for a medical school that was part of an academic campus. And there are huge advantages which we can talk about it as the discussion goes forward. Incidentally, A&M, when they learned about the developments at Austin, said, okay, we're going to make our medical school part of our university, and administratively they did that. But I'll remind you that their medical school is principally at Temple and at Round Rock, and their campus is principally at College Station. We're talking about a different kind of situation, both in Austin and here. As pointed out, we're in the midst of a presidential search for a president of the overall university. That search has begun. It does pose a somewhat unusual situation because when you're trying to recruit a dean, the dean usually wants to know who the provost and the president's going to be. And so one of my responsibilities is to provide continuity and basically to be able to recruit a dean in such a way that I can guarantee that the commitments made to that individual will be held up. And the reason for that, of course, is one of time. As the provost pointed out, we're hoping to matriculate the first medical students in the fall of 2016. And if we are going to do that, we got a lot of work to be done until that time, and we can't do it seriatim. We have to do it and have to parallel process it. And I want to try to explain to you where we are and then also how we hope to interact with this faculty, which is going to be such an important part of what happens. At the same time, Julio Leon is responsible for making recommendations about the organization of this new university, and we've met with him. And again, some of the recommendations he makes have to be predicated on the notion that we're creating a medical school that is part of an academic campus. And finally, the provost and I both were involved in the selection of a master planner that the Regents approved at this last meeting, who will be doing a master plan for the new university. But again, their report's not going to be available for 6 or 8 months. We can't wait for that report to move forward if we're going to meet the timeline we're talking about. So I'm going to describe a number of activities that are designed to be parallel processes. There's been an interest in a medical school in this part of the state for a very long time. In the end of the 90s, that led to an activity in which the legislature created a regional academic health center. The regional academic health center was located physically in two places, two buildings in Harlingen and a research building on this campus. And there is a plot of land on this campus which is part of the regional academic health center. That center undertook a series of activities such that we on average have 65 or more medical students in their third and fourth year of medical school here all the time. They do their education in the hospitals and the offices and the clinics at the federally qualified health centers, Clinica and others, and they have a very good experience. They also perform just as well on exams and in other modalities as their fellow students at San Antonio when they are examined. So we know that they can have very good clinical experiences. We also had a number of residency programs, but unfortunately very limited. One of these programs is at Valley Baptist, and it has 15 residents in internal medicine, and one at the McAllen Medical Center, which has 18 residents in family medicine. These are 3-year programs, so that means you have a total of 11 first-year residency slots. You cannot have a medical school with that few residencies. In March, 3.5 years ago, a report was done for the Harlingen Economic Development Council on the development of a medical school here. And when it was released, I said at that time that the UT system was committed to a medical school in South Texas on 4 conditions. The first was that it had to be a comprehensive medical school. We were not interested in what's called a community-based school, which has been the kind of school which has been developed mostly around the country over the last decade. That is one which focused only on the education of practitioners, usually primary care practitioners. Yes, we want to do that, but we want a comprehensive school which both educates medical students, educates other health professionals with medical students, and which has a serious research program. And by comprehensive, we mean a research-intensive as well as a community-based school. And those two features are important features in terms of what we're trying to do in the development. Second requirement was that it had to be a regional school. There are simply not resources in any single city of this area that will support a medical school. And that's a sine qua non. The third was that we had to have adequate residency programs. You cannot get a medical school accredited without adequate residency programs. Why? First, because the quality of the medical student education depends critically on the environment, and medical students interact mostly with residents. Yes, they have attending physicians, but if you look at how the day is spent, it's with residents. And secondly, if you want to have medical students who are going to practice in the area, students don't practice where they go to medical school. They practice where they take their residency. And we know in this state, for example, that if a student graduating from one of our schools does a residency here, between 83 and 85% will practice in Texas, and over 65% will practice in the area in which they do their residency. So we've been working hard on that over the last several years as a first requirement. And I'm pleased to say that we've gone from 33 resident positions now to a guarantee of a minimum of 148 residencies. We have the situation is that we just introduced a new program director for adult psychiatry and for child and adolescent psychiatry a week ago. That program involves Valley Baptist Hospital, Rio Grande State Hospital, and the VA. And we're trying to point to matriculate the first residents in psychiatry by 2015. Incidentally, that also offers some healthcare delivery opportunities, and we talked earlier this morning about health homes for mentally ill patients and so forth. We have a program in family medicine at the McAllen Medical Center. Incidentally, the Valley Baptist program will go from 15 to 30 residents over the next several years. We're starting new programs in internal medicine, family medicine, surgery, and obstetrics gynecology at Doctors Hospital and Renaissance. In addition to that 148 slots, we are negotiating actively with a group of hospitals around the pediatric residency and also expanding another family medicine program. And one of the ways we were able to accomplish this is because the state was granted a Medicaid waiver, so-called 1115 waiver, money for which can be used to improve access to health care and quality of care. And we have, and I want to make this very clear, the Health Science Center at San Antonio has done an extraordinary job in helping us with the development of this medical school. They have spent an enormous amount of time helping us with these residency programs. They've helped us recruit not only the directors for psychiatry, but a new director in surgery, a new director in internal medicine, a new director in family medicine. We lost the top candidate to in OBGYN to another UT school, but that's the way it goes. So we're still back to square one with that recruitment. But in order to get that money, the university had to put up tax money. And it's San Antonio that put up the money, which is drawing down the federal funded match. Having done those residency programs, we now have to move expeditiously with regard to the matriculation of students. Well, what about facilities? We do have the two buildings in Harlingen. One of them, we have a simulation hospital that opens this month. The Regents have invested $10 million in simulation. Includes that laboratory, which will be a state-of-the-art laboratory. It is a state-of-the-art laboratory, but also will interact with schools here at Brownsville and in the community. And this is a combination centralized and decentralized simulation hospital. That's a very important development, not only because it allows you to teach medical students, but we would like to see interdisciplinary education. One of the areas you do that is you have nursing students, pharmacy students, other students participate in simulations, whether it's to deliver a baby, whether it's a resuscitation, whether it's a surgical procedure. But the point is they're working together and learning what it's like and what the role of the various players are. That's not the only area for interdisciplinary education. There are a whole variety of others, and I'll be glad to discuss those with you. In addition, there are a number of classrooms at Harlingen that can be used for education, and we anticipate they will be used for medical students throughout their period of time in education. At the same time, we needed a facility that would house a dean and dean's offices, core faculty, and seminar rooms and classrooms. And that building was approved by the Regents as part of the package that the provost made reference to, $54 million for an 88,000 square foot building, which will go right next to the EROC building on the ROC campus, on this campus. The plans for that building have been accelerated, particularly because Health Science Center San Antonio also was building an academic building, and they did research across the country in terms of new educational buildings and so forth. And they had designed a building which we could use as a template for the building here. That's why we were able to move as quickly as we did. Now we had to change the scale. Some of the emphasis is a little different. This building will be very intensive in terms of both hardwiring and wireless. It's very intensive with regard to small group instruction, both seminars and small classrooms. Even the large classrooms and the auditorium, which is being built, are designed so you can turn the tables and so forth and now have small groups of students interact. We're talking about a matriculating class of 50 students, but we've designed this building so that the large classrooms would accommodate 120 students. And all in all, we can put 400 students in this building at a given time if we use all of the rooms. So we've got some potential for growth, even though it'll be a number of years before we get to that kind of growth. The building is also designed so that one wing is open 24/7, so that students can get in any time to study, to interact with each other, and so forth. The remainder of the building, which includes faculty offices and classrooms, can be held in a secure way. I'm asked often, where will the medical school be? It is a regional school. The dean's office and associate deans and many of the admissions people will be in the building that we've just discussed on the Pan Am campus. However, the dean will have an office at Harlingen. We will anticipate other student services at Harlingen. And one of the notions behind the educational model, and I'll say more about that in a moment, is that medical students have clinical experiences with patients from day one of the medical school. So our whole goal here is to have a research-intensive, community-based experience for students. And they may see their patients at Sioux Clinic in Harlingen. They may see them in the federally health qualified center in Brownsville, or in a number of other places across across the region. They may do their primary care and some of their public health instruction at Harlingen, whereas they may do other kinds of things here. So while there will be a primary responsibility for education at the new building here, it is a regional activity, and I'll explain to you more as we talk about it, how that might work. The dean of the medical school, now being recruited, will report to the dean of the medical school at San Antonio until the new university is established. As soon as the new university is established, that dean will report to the provost and to the president of the new university, so that it will be an integral part of this university. For practical purposes right now, we're doing the search out of the San Antonio Health Science Center, but it includes search committee members from all of the campuses. So it's a broad group of faculty who are doing the recruitment. I mentioned that we see this as a research-intensive, community-based activity. On the research side, we feel we need to make some very significant moves in terms of biomedical research. And the experience has been that trying to do that faculty member by faculty member or whatever doesn't work very well. We have to create critical masses of faculty around research subjects that would make a significant difference. Now, that doesn't mean that one doesn't interact with existing faculty, and again, we need to, as we go forward, devise mechanisms by which we are in fact involving research faculty at all of the campuses together. But we have made a commitment to, and we have a search committee that is recruiting a chief of a diabetes research unit, which has 8 FTEs and $7.5 million. The choice of diabetes is based partially on the needs in the community in terms of what kinds of research would be most relevant, the funding of research, and we believe that particularly funding of diabetes research in South Texas will be very attractive, by the fact that the Joslin Clinic has a relationship with the Doctors Hospital Renaissance to do clinical trials, so that we have a natural way to have a research group interacting with clinical trials. The diabetes activity is simply the first step. It's just a model in terms of trying to get a critical mass in a particular area. Our hope is that if this appears to be working, that we would do similar kinds of things in other areas. But we do feel that it's going to be necessary to have some clear focus as we try to build the research-intensive nature of this institution. So far as the curriculum is concerned, one, I do want to remind everybody that we do have the Transformation in Medical Education initiative, including A-Prime, which, as you know, is an opportunity for students, even in their freshman year of college, to indicate their interest in medicine, with an emphasis on the interdisciplinary nature of the medical experience, competency-based learning, trying to find ways to reduce the redundancy in the educational content that goes forward, teaching about professionalism at an early stage. And our hope is that with a number of these programs, that there will be significant numbers of students who may be able to complete their MD degree in either 6 or 7 years instead of necessarily 8. Why is that important? The average student debt in this state is now approaching, the average is now approaching $180,000. What that does is it scares the hell out of anybody from a low-income family to think about going into medicine. Secondly, if they do go into medicine, it says you better become a neurosurgeon so you can pay your debts off. So, A, we're interested in cutting the total amount of debt. Secondly, we've worked hard with the legislature, and we were able in the last session to get reinstitution of a program we got several sessions ago in which students can get $160,000 in loan repayment, $40,000 a year for 4 years, if they serve either an underserved area or an underserved specialty, such as psychiatry, general surgery, but also primary care. And so if we can match the cost with the loan repayment program, now we've got something where we think we can make a better case that you can afford to go to medical school, and if you're willing to commit to the kinds of things that the community needs, that you'll get a way to get those loans paid off. The current A-Prime program relates to UT Medical Branch and Health Science Center Houston, but as we were discussing earlier, our assumption is that with the new medical school, A-Prime will become part of the new medical school constellation, and now again you have an opportunity to integrate activities. As far as the curriculum is concerned, I've already mentioned the notion that we start with patients early. Secondly, that we do not anticipate a lot of discipline-oriented courses. There isn't going to be a course in microbiology and immunology, or a course in pharmacology or physiology or whatever. What we anticipate is a form of modular education in which you take a module in cardiovascular disease. You start out by having the students meet 1 or 2 patients with problems in cardiovascular disease so that there's an anchor in a patient. Then they learn the anatomy of the cardiovascular system, the histology of the cardiovascular system, the physiology of the cardiovascular system, the pathology of the cardiovascular system, diseases involving the cardiovascular system, the pharmacology of the cardiovascular system, and you integrate multiple aspects of what we would previously have done in a separate anatomy course as part of these modules. And there would be 10 or 11 such modules, which would occur over a period of 18 to 20 months. Again, we're looking to shorten the period of time. We're not talking 2 years. We're talking about a shorter period of time. Will there be any discipline-oriented courses? Well, there may be 1 or 2, and that's an ongoing debate. But one of the problems we have is it's crucial to have a dean who buys into all of these activities, a founding dean who is on board with a variety of these activities. So our hope is that we will identify the founding dean over the next couple of months. That founding dean doesn't necessarily have to be here on site, but we do want that founding dean to have an opportunity to look at the general directions that we're trying to go and say, yeah, that makes sense to me. Because the last thing we want to do is try to design something and then have a dean come in and try to completely do something differently. How did we come up with this approach? Come up with this approach by 2 mechanisms. By one, looking across the country as to what's happening in medical education. And secondly, by having the opportunity for the medical school at San Antonio to get reaccredited by the Liaison Committee for Medical Education with very high grades several months ago. And this is the curriculum they've evolved, and they've been doing it for a year. And so we know a fair amount of what works and what doesn't work. We know that it's a model that's consistent with how we would like our students to learn. And we know that the evaluations so far have been relatively positive. Does that mean we won't tweak it? Of course not. Another element that's related to that is that we're doing a similar kind of thing at Austin. And believe it or not, we've been talking between Austin and San Antonio about medical school curricula. And we want to not only take advantage of ideas, but we're also thinking about distance learning opportunities so that we can distance learn some programs that we develop conjointly. Thirdly, the Institute for Transformational Learning, which is the $50 million institute that was created to transform education, is involved now in a series of conversations with San Antonio and with Austin, such that we may develop some modules which are used for distance learning both there and with other campuses. And finally, campuses such as Southwestern, which have been developing some important new innovations in education, will also be able to be wired to the campuses here. As far as departmental structure is concerned, we think there's going to be very few of them. The general model that we think will develop is that we may very well have either 1 or 2, quote, basic science departments. That individuals in those departments will, in fact, be key members of the educational activity, and hopefully, if they're recruited properly, will be recruited conjointly with some of your departments or departments at Brownsville, such that they would have a joint appointment in a discipline which is part of the academic campus, but for the medical school, they would be part of a much broader department, because as I've explained to you, the idea is to not have all the education departmentally based. It's about people. We also anticipate, and this is a model which is working well, even Duke, which is a not only very high quality school, but also one that's been relatively traditional, is moving in the direction of having a core of faculty who do the bulk of the teaching in the first 18 to 20 months. And again, that core would be co-located in this new building that we're talking about building. They may have an office someplace else as well, but they would be co-located, and they would be the team who would be doing the worker bee activity with regard to these modules in terms of education. Again, not limited to them, bringing in people with other kinds of talent, but providing the core from an educational point of view. Similarly, on the clinical side, we're going to try to avoid having 25 departments, which is what the current structure is in many medical schools. The irony, of course, is that if you go to established medical schools, they're all trying to get to the same place. We have the advantage that we can start from scratch. And one of the things that I get a kick out of is that I teach a course called Practice of Medicine involving 10 or 11 medical students. And a week ago I had the opportunity to say to them, if you were creating a new curriculum in a medical school, how would you create it? And I sat back and was elated when they began to describe all the things they would like to see happen, which is what we're trying to do. So we've at least gotten some preliminary validation from the students. The dilemma we have, and we want to have more conversations with the faculty here, is at what point do you talk? How do you work out those kinds of communications? So our proposal is that as soon as we have a dean who in fact can speak for the medical school, as opposed to those of us who are looking at major directions and so forth, we would then create a process which would involve the provost and the faculty to look at a series of issues. The whole issue of faculty appointments, for example. Who recruits whom, where their appointments go, how do they work? Secondly, what are the roles of the faculty in the educational programs? If in fact we decide to go with this modular approach, then how do we figure out who does what? And again, it's not a negotiation with the Department of X or the Department of Y. It's about where's the talent, the interest that will put together that kind of a program. Where are the research strengths? And how and in what way can we start to build on those? I've told you we've got a commitment in diabetes. There's also a lot of other people working on diabetes, and we don't mean to make this an isolated activity. And we're also going to want to find other foci of activity. Infectious disease is another one that's obviously a high priority in terms of what goes on in the region, but there may be others. There's been an interest in information technology, a number of other activities. You take your choice. So we would anticipate that certainly in the first quarter of next year, and I'm hoping that may happen as early as February, but I can't promise that we would undergo a series of conversations with faculty throughout the new university with regard to the roles of faculty, the operations of it, and so forth. At the same time, given the time frame that we're working in, we feel we've got to parallel process all this, that we can't do it seriatim, that we can't wait to see who comes on board and when they do that and what happens next. We feel that we have to look, and as long as we keep our options as flexible as possible, and as long as there's a general agreement about the general direction we're going, then we're going to pursue those themes. I have had the privilege of interviewing all 4 finalists for this position separately, and I can tell you that they're all on board. That is, without being talked into anything, they see that the directions we're trying to go are in fact the directions where medical education is likely to go. And they think it's a great opportunity because they don't have to start by overcoming the calendar. They don't have to start by overcoming all of the rigidities that exist in existing institutions, and they can begin to do something that's much more creative. That there will be issues, that there will be problems, of course. But I think that what I'm trying to do is sort of give you a little flavor of the overall direction. I think we're making progress on the residency business. We got a facilities thing. We have a prototype in terms of the San Antonio curriculum, which looks very successful and which is similar to where we as a system want to go. We have the opportunity to learn from the conversations both at Austin and the Institute for Transformational Learning. And we have the opportunity to jumpstart some research activities with the notion that we will ultimately try to build a series of other research interfaces. I will conclude by saying that it was amazing to me to come to Texas, having lived always in medical schools that were part of universities. And there's no question that medical students, for example, benefit enormously by exposure to the behavioral sciences. And the best behavioral scientists are not in medical schools. The medical school students benefit enormously in the faculty from opportunities to deal with health economists, to deal with engineers, to deal with folks who are involved in business. And we can easily see in the long term a series of tracks for students in which they may elect a primary care track, they could elect to become a business manager, they could elect and they could elect to get an MD PhD. Although we're not going to start with a formal MD PhD program, we need to be flexible enough so that we can create opportunities for those students who want to do that to be able to do it. So why don't I stop at this point? I'd like to give you an opportunity for slings, arrows, and outrage, and to answer any questions you might have. We have been in touch with accrediting bodies, both the Liaison Committee on Medical Education and the ACGME, which accredits the graduate medical education programs. There is enormous enthusiasm for this project. I mean, you can imagine that these entities want this to succeed. They're going to be as flexible as they can be in terms of meeting standards. We still have to meet those standards. And we have a series of landmarks. And again, my challenge is to make sure that we're moving fast enough so that we can get those landmarks and so that we can try to matriculate that class in 2016. If we couldn't do it in 2016, would it be a catastrophe? No. On the other hand, by putting one's feet to the fire and having a good firm deadline and have that building I mentioned to you, we're going to break ground on that building, I hope, depending on our colleagues here, as early as March or April in terms of destruction and so forth. We want that building to be available in the first quarter of 2016, well in advance of the first students. So we're fast-tracking a lot of these things, not to the detriment of quality, but we've got to be able to move the agenda so that, and holding people's feet to the fire is part of my job. So why don't I stop at that point, and I'd be glad to answer questions, hear suggestions, ideas, and so forth as to how we might proceed. Yes, sir.
Sean, thank you for your remarks. It really is very informative. And clearly your reference to the potential for joint appointments is a strong signal about how we will work together. But can you conceive in the model that we're developing where the medical students will literally sit side by side with students from the health sciences, for example, whether it be nurses or PAs or pharmacists? Because you said we're not going to be caught in the typical disciplinary courses, more modular approach, but will there still, you think there'll still be opportunities for students from across disciplines to sit in the same classroom?
That's part of our goal. Now, when you say classes, they won't all be classes. When you look at interdisciplinary education, there are half a dozen places where it works very well. I mentioned the simulation hospital because simulation works very well, and there's good experience with that. Secondly, we began a program at San Antonio 5 years ago, where medical students, nursing students, pharmacy students examined medical errors and did in-depth analyses of those in terms of what went wrong, what was the role of the various players, what's the culture. I'm fond of telling the story that someone asked how long it take to discharge a patient from the hospital, the medical student said 30 minutes. The nursing student said 3.5 hours. That gives you a little sense of the distance between them. Certain kinds of courses are good for joint activities. Ethics is a good example of an area where there is overarching activity. Incidentally, the program that started at San Antonio that involves mental health professions is now part of the regular curriculum in the second year. We are inventing a whole series of new kinds of interactions for students, not all of which would take place in the first year and a half. For example, there is a very interesting model which was pioneered at Rochester, in which you give a multidisciplinary group of students a case study, if you wish, and you actually send them out into the community to find out how would a patient be managed from the perspective of all of those players as part of their activity. At the same time, a lot of this depends on real-world experience. So part of what we're interested in is the further evolution of health homes. For example, in the case of psychiatry, we're encouraging with those new, and with the enthusiasm of those program directors, the creation of health homes for patients with mental illness, where you can see a multidisciplinary team working together and having medical students engaged in that kind of experience, a real-world experience. The same thing is happening at Clinica, which is a federally qualified health center where they're developing health homes. We actually got some 1115 waiver money to finance some expanded health homes. So I would say there are a variety of places. I don't see them going through the curriculum altogether all the time by any means, but I do think that the interactions will take place in a variety of these kinds of instances. And incidentally, again, people have been trying to do this all around the country. My own campuses, when I was EVC, I keep talking about them in a proprietary way. Houston is now moving forward aggressively, but it took several years just to get the calendar straight. San Antonio had to do some gymnastics on the calendar. I mean, they're not trivial in established institutions, but if we start out with that model, I think we got a real good shot at it. And I think all of our candidates, our dean candidates, understand that.
Dr. Stein, just as an add-on, you may be aware that, and my faculty will correct me if I'm wrong, but our physician assistant program uses a modular approach in education now, correct? So,
Amen. Other comments, thoughts? Yes, ma'am. Right. I see the evolution of the A-Prime program in a way that's very similar to the honors program. Whether the academic campus chooses to maintain the relationship with Baylor, you guys are going to have to decide. We don't. Well, again, right now the model that we would be enthusiastic about would be to see if we can't get the A-Prime activity to evolve in that same direction. And the reason for that, first of all, we have external evaluation of our 4 pilots, including A-Prime. We're looking at models that could be very much generalized across not only all of our medical schools, but across medical schools across the country. And these pilots have been designed to test a variety of hypotheses. And so I don't want to give those up in the sense that the regions have invested $8 million in time. And it's very important we come out with some conclusions, not only that a campus can do such and such, but that when you look at various campuses and various approaches, that some seem to work better than others. You know, it may be that you end up with 4 different programs, but we'd like to know that they all produce the same kind of results. So coming back to your question, I would see A-Prime as being the vehicle to work with the medical school in the foreseeable future, with a decision about the honors program in Baylor being a campus decision. And incidentally, we collaborate with Baylor on a lot of programs, so that's not an issue at all. Now, is it possible that the new medical school might want to do a deal with the Honors College and with Baylor? Sure. I mean, I think there are ways that I could conceive of that, but I wouldn't want to give up A prime. Yes, ma'am.
Where I went to school, we had University Hospital and University clinics wherever we would go. I went to UTPA. Here in the Valley, I'm also faculty for the UTSA kids that are coming from San Antonio over at Valley Baptist. It's a little kind of just folded. I can imagine that initially we would utilize the facility that we have here to get students through different rotations, and then ultimately the basic residencies that we're setting up. Do you see in the foreseeable future, like setting up a university hospital and then university clinics, kind of doing everything together?
No. And I want to be, I want to be very straight with you. First of all, hospitals are very expensive, very difficult to operate in the current climate. Secondly, my prediction is, and I think I can cite some data to support it, hospital utilization is going to fall over the next decade. We've already seen that. Last year, expenditures by hospitals fell 2.4%, even though their prices went up. Why is that? Because much more is being done on the ambulatory side than in the hospital. You can now do well over 50% of all your surgery on the ambulatory side. And that's going to explode. So if you look around the UT system, we're making our investments in ambulatory facilities. We're building your old bailiwick. We built the facilities at Victory Lake and put a huge new ambulatory facility. We're just adding another building which will have 39 short-term beds if a woman has a delivery and needs to stay over. But the point is, if you look at what we did at San Antonio, we built a MARC. Hospitals are high risk. They're expensive. We would not want to go into competition with the hospitals that are here in terms of their relatively fragile situation. The point that you make is a very good one about some of the problems with regard to how you deal with a hospital that you don't own. I'm optimistic that will regularize to a great deal. One of the things that's going to happen here is you're going to see even more competition among the hospitals, not just for patients, but for the quality of their educational programs. I mean, Doctors Hospital Renaissance wants to become a first-class academic health center. I've spent a lot of time with those docs. I mean, there's a urologist there who said to me, I was about to go back to Duke because I love teaching, but I want to stay here and make the medical school work. I think you're going to see much more attention to the quality of the educational experience because they're going to compete. They want to be seen as serious academic centers. And that's going to be a leverage for us in terms of how hospitals behave and so forth. Keep in mind, of course, that the Valley is unique in the sense that everything in here is for profit. I mean, here we have the economically most disadvantaged part of the state, and all the hospitals are for profit. But again, I didn't mean to sound perfunctory. My own view is we ought to try to build on the relationship with the existing hospitals, make them as strong as possible, as competitive as possible. I want them to have services so that kids don't have to go to Laredo, to Driscoll, to get their pediatric care. I'd like to see a situation where if you need a bone marrow transplant, you can get a bone marrow transplant here instead of somewhere else. And I think by doing that, we can change the tone of things. Now, keep in mind, in these residency programs, the faculty who do that are faculty of the university, and they're paid by the university. In each of these cases, the hospital pays us and we pay the faculty. So we're going to have a lot more control of what happens than currently exists. And I think everybody understands that the academic standards have to increase and so forth. And the final point I make is this is what we're doing in Austin with the Seton system and some of the other community programs. Darrell Kirsch, who's the president of the Association of American Medical Colleges, visited us in Austin last December. And in his speech, he said, "You don't know how lucky you are that you don't own the hospitals." And so I'm not about to rush out and try to own hospitals. Other comments, criticisms, suggestions? This can't be this group. I mean, I teach a third-year junior seminar for undergraduates, and they ask more questions than you guys. Well, you raise a very interesting point. I mentioned to you that this building will accommodate up to 400 students. We're going to start with a class of 50. And when you have 2 classes, 3 classes, 4, at most you have 200 students, even if all 4 classes were there, which they're not going to be because a lot of them are going to be on clinical rotations and so forth. In the case of the building at San Antonio, we do see use of that building by other students, particularly other health professional students. I would see that particularly in the first few years, you'd want to get maximum use of the building. Again, I got to be careful here because I don't want to make too many specific rules for a medical school that I'm not going to micromanage. But I see a real potential for using that kind of facility, particularly for interprofessional activities, when you have that much room. On the other hand, I had a shot at getting $54 million, and I'm going to build as big as I can because I don't want to build and then find that we double the size of the class and we don't have room for those students. So there'll be a time here where there'll be a fair amount of flexibility. What happens in the long run, we'll have to see. I think one of the nice things, I've spent opportunity with the provost and other folks to talk about the development of the site on the rack for future buildings, and I could see situations in which, if and when the class size and so forth begins to approach that of some of the mature schools, that we would build a bit additional space there. And there are plans to do that, both research space and clinical space. One of the things I like about it is that the campus, with the president, with the provost and others, already had given a lot of thought to how a medical district could develop. And I like that. I mean, I think that, and we had no trouble selling the regions on the, basically we came up with this plan over a 4 or 5 months period. I mean, once it became clear to me that we were going to have a medical school down here, we need to move very expeditiously. We're going to get, and it has sailed through. We got to deliver. Other comments? Yes, sir.
Where are we in our timeline vis-a-vis Austin? What is their projection?
We are not in a race in either cases. For students, they're projecting fall of 2016. So we're exactly the same target goal in terms of when we matriculate students. They have a different set of issues. For example, we have a lot of administrative infrastructure here called the RAC. So we got a lot of people who do a variety of things related to medical school. They didn't. So they've got to crank up in a variety of those kinds of things. They're in the same place we were in terms of creating a curriculum, except they didn't have the advantage of San Antonio and the knowledge of what the San Antonio activity is. They've got to build several $100 million worth of new facilities because they have no buildings. They don't have the 2 buildings at Harlingen. They don't have the ERAC. So they've got to build a whole bunch of buildings, and the regents have approved the construction of those, but they got to do things like straighten the street before they put the new, and keep in mind again, in regard to your question, the teaching hospital that's going to be built in Austin is being built by Seton Healthcare, by the Seton Healthcare family. It's actually built by them on county hospital district land. Actually, it's UT land, which we've leased to the county, and the county is leasing it to Seton to build it. So we have not actually leased anything to a Catholic hospital, which is not an insignificant issue, given the ethical issues and so forth. So in any case, there are different problems in both places, but we are trying to shoot for the fall of 2016 for both. Now keep in mind one other point which is relevant, and that is beginning the fall of 2014, we will matriculate a small number of students at San Antonio who will be part of what we call the South Texas track. And it's being advertised for students. They would do their first 2 years in San Antonio, pending the construction and everything else here, and their last 2 years here. Now they differ from the students who are here now, as they wouldn't be volunteers. They would be people who are specifically choosing a South Texas track. And they would be presented with their degree would be a San Antonio degree, but it would be presented here. So in other words, we're trying to do a transition here where there'd be a certain number of students who are identifying with South Texas, but doing their first 2 years in San Antonio. Austin's not doing that. I mean, there is no intermediary step. Okay?
Dr. Shine, you referred to the Institute for Diabetes. And in full disclosure, I'm on the search committee with the director, so I understand a little bit about it. But I'm interested in knowing what you perceive as the relationship between the Institute, the medical school, and the rest of the university.
The Institute I see as being, like many institutes, administratively in the medical school, with the director of that reporting to the dean of the medical school. But like any institute, again, you would anticipating have joint appointments, and you would anticipate that there might be people who are primarily, and for this case, Pan Am faculty who are working in that institute. I mean, the whole concept of an institute is that you have multiple departments, schools, or others playing in it. The Cancer Institute at UCLA had people from all of the schools in it. And I would anticipate the same kind of institute. I also believe, and again, this is, maybe this is a wishful thinking, but I don't think it is. One of the reasons for doing with the Diabetes Institute as such is I think we can raise money for it, and I think we can build facilities for it. So I think ultimately you build a Diabetes Institute, which again is a multi-school, multi-faculty kind of institute. Institutes have cachet in terms of naming opportunities and so forth, and my own view is that as a former medical school dean who's done a lot of fundraising, that's the kind of thing that's, for example, I've talked to the development people who are working with you guys and said that needs to be one of the things that's on the list for a donor. Well, thank you very much.
Dr. Shine, once again, thank you very much for being with us. What you should know is that maybe 2 or 3 months ago, Dr. Shine, Dr. Julio Leon, and I met in these same facilities to talk about the development of the medical school. And I posed to Dr. Shine and said, you know, we really need to have a forum which faculty, staff, and others are informed about the developments of the medical school and what are the next steps, etc. And immediately he said, absolutely. So it was a matter of planning it. And so we thank you so much for being here and sharing this information for us. I want to invite all of you as well to participate in a meeting that we have, another forum that we have on Monday, November 25th, 1:30, this same place with Katie Haycock, President of Educational Trust. She's going to be joining us on Monday to talk about new developments, student success, new initiatives as part of the new university. And by the way, we are having these forums. Dr. Shine just came from UT Brownsville having this same conversation with the faculty, staff, and students there. And so we appreciate your time and commitment. Colleagues, we are embarking in the process of creating a new university. We are in the development of creating a new medical school. We are actively engaged in a national search for the president of the new university. We are completing a national search for the founding dean of the medical school. Just yesterday, we started receiving the first preliminary reports from the operational working groups, all 29 of them. On December 1st, we will receive the reports as well from the academic working groups, all 13 of them. You want to talk about transformation? You want to talk about change? There's no better definition than this. However, this will not be possible without the active participation, collaboration, commitment, and engagement of all of you and our colleagues at Brownsville, at Pan American, and throughout the Rio Grande Valley community. So on behalf of President Nelson and myself, thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for embarking on this very important journey that will certainly transform the educational process in the Rio Grande Valley and will allow us to serve our communities and integrate them into this educational process. Thank you very much for being here. Have a great day.